IELTS Reading Out Loud, Day 5. I read out loud IELTS reading sections to hope to improve my speaking skills. Part 1. Raising the Mary Rose. How a 16th century warship was recovered from the seabed. On 19 July 1545, English and French fleets were engaged in a sea battle off the coast of southern England in the area of water called Solent, between Portsmouth and the Isle of Wight. Along the English vessel was a warship by the name of Mary Rose. Built in Portsmouth some 35 years earlier, she had had a long and successful fighting career and was a favorite of King Henry VIII. Accounts of what happened to the ship vary. While witnesses agree that she was not hit by the French, some maintain that she was outdated, overladen, and sailing too low in the water. Others that she was mishandled by undisciplined crew. What is undisputed, however, is that the Mary Rose sank into the Solent that day, taking at least 500 men with her. After the battle, attempts were made to recover the ship, but these failed. The Mary Rose came to rest on the seabed, lying on her starboard right side at an angle of approximately 60 degrees. The body of the ship acted as a trap for the sand and mud carried by Solent currents. As a result, the starboard side filled rapidly, leaving the exposed port left side to be eroded by marine organism and mechanical degradation. Because of the way the ship sank, nearly all of the starboard have survived intact. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the entire site became covered with a layer of hard gray clay, which minimized further erosion. Then, on 16 June 1836, some fishermen in the Solent found that their equipment was caught on an underwater obstruction, which turned out to be the Mary Rose. Diver John Dean happened to be exploring another sunken ship nearby, and the fishermen approached him, asking him to free their gear. Dean dived down and found the equipment caught on a timber protruding slightly from the seabed. Exploring further, he uncovered several other timbers and a bronze gun. Dean continued diving on the site intermittently until 1840, recovering several more guns, two bows, various timbers, part of a pump, and various other small finds. The Mary Rose then faded into obscurity for another 100 years. But in 1965, military historian and amateur diver Alexander McKee, in conjunction with the British Sub-Aqua Club, initiated a project called Solent Ships. While on paper this was a plan to examine a number of known wrecks in the Solent, what McKee really hoped for was to find the Mary Rose. Ordinary search techniques proved unsatisfactory, so McKee entered into collaboration with Harold E. Edgerton, professor of electrical engineering at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. In 1967, Edgerton's side-scan sonar system revealed a large, unusually shaped object, which McKee believed was the Mary Rose. Further excavations revealed stray pieces of timber and an iron gun, but the climax to the operation came when, on May 5th, 1971, part of the ship's frame was uncovered. McKee and his team now knew for certain that they had found the wreck, but were as yet unaware that were as yet unaware that it also housed a treasure trove of beautifully preserved artifacts. Interest in the project grew. Interest in the project grew, and in 1979, the Mary Rose Trust was formed, with Prince Charles as its president and Dr. Margaret Rule as archaeological director. The decision whether or not to salvage the wreck was not an easy one, although an excavation in 1979 has shown that it might be possible to raise the hull. While the original aim was to raise the hull if at all feasible, the operation was not given the go-ahead until January 1982, when all the necessary information was available. An important factor in trying to salvage the Mary Rose was that the remaining hull was an open shell. This led to an important decision being taken, namely to carry out the lifting operation in three very distinct stages. The hull was attached to a lifting frame via a network of bolts and lifting wires. The problem of the hull being sucked back downwards into the mud was overcome by using 12 hydraulic jacks. These raised it a few centimeters over a period of several days, as the lifting frame rose slowly up its four legs. It was only when the hull was hanging freely from the lifting frame, clear of the seabed and the suction effect of the surrounding mud, that the salvage operation progressed to the second stage. In this stage, the lifting frame was fixed to a hook attached to a crane, and the hull was lifted completely clear of the seabed and transferred underwater into lifting cradle. This required precise positioning to locate the legs into the stepping guides of the lifting cradle. The lifting cradle was designed to fit the hull using archaeological survey drawings, and was fitted with airbags to provide additional cushioning for the hull's delicate timber framework. The third and final stage was to lift the entire structure into the air, by which time the hull was also supported from below. Finally, on October 11, 1982, millions of people around the world held their breath as the timber skeleton of the Mary Rose was lifted clear of the water, ready to be returned home to Portsmouth. Part 2. What destroyed the civilization of Easter Island? Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, as it is known locally, is home to several hundred ancient human statues, the Moai. After this remote Pacific Iceland was settled by the Polynesians, it remained isolated for centuries. All the energy and resources that went into the Moai, some of which are 10 meters tall and weighed over 7,000 kilos, came from the island itself. Yet the Dutch explorers landed in 1722. They met a Stone Age culture. The Moai were carved with stone tools, then transported to for many kilometers, without the use of animals or wheels, to massive stone platforms. The identity of the Moai builders was in doubt until well into the 20th century. Thor Heyerdahl, the Norwegian ethnographer and adventurer, thought the statues had been created by pre-Inca pupils from Peru. Best-selling Swiss author Erich von Daniken believed that they were built by stranded extraterrestrials terrestrial, modern science, linguistic, archaeological, and genetic evidence has definitely proved the Moai builders were Polynesians, but not how they moved their creations. Local folklore maintains that the statues walked, while researchers have tended to assume the ancestor dragged the statues somehow using ropes and logs. When the Europeans arrived, Rapa Nui was grassland with only few scrawny trees. In the 1970s and 1980s, though, researchers found pollen preserved in lake sediments, which proved the island had been covered in lush palms forests for thousands of years. Only after the Polynesians arrived did those forests disappear. US scientist Jared Diamond believes that the Rapa Nui people, descendants of Polynesian settlers, wrecked their own environment. They had unfortunately settled on an extremely fragile island, dry, cool, and too remote to be properly fertilized by windblown volcanic ash. When the Icelander cleared the forest for firewood and farming, the forest didn't grow back. As trees became scarce and they could no longer construct wooden canoes for fishing, they ate birds. Soil erosion decreased the crop yields. Before Europeans arrived, the Rapa Nui had descended into civil wars and cannibalism, he maintains. The collapse of their isolated civilization, Diamond writes, is a worst-case scenario for what may lie ahead of us in our future. The Moai, he thinks, accelerated the self-destruction. Diamond interprets them as power displaced by rival chieftains who, trapped on a remote island, lacked other ways of asserting their dominance. They completed by building even bigger figures. Diamond thinks they laid the Moai on wooden sledges hauled over log rails, but that requires both a lot of wood and a lot of people. To feed the people, even more land had to be cleared. When the wood was gone and civil war began, the Icelander began toppling the Moai. By the 19th century, none were standing. Archaeologist Terry Hunt of the University of Hawaii and Carl Lippo of California State University agree that Easter Island lost its lush forest and that it was an ecological catastrophe, but they believe the Icelanders themselves weren't to blame, and the Moai certainly were not. Archaeological excavations indicate that Rapa Nui went to heroic efforts to protect the resource of their wind-lashed infertile fields. They built thousands of circular stone windbreaks and gardened inside them, and used broken volcanic rocks to keep the soil moist. In short, Hunt and Lippo argue the prehistoric Rapa Nui were pioneers of sustainable farming. Hunt and Lippo contended that Moai building was an activity that helped keep the peace between Icelander. They also believed that moving the Moai required few people and no wood because they were walked upright. On that issue, Hunt and Lippo say archaeological evidence backs up Rapa Nui folklore. Recent experiments indicate that as few as 18 people could, with 3 strong ropes and a bit of practice, easily maneuver a 1,000 Moai replica a few hundred meters. A figure's fat bellies tilted them forward, and a D-shaped base allowed handlers to row and rock them side to side. Moreover, Hunt and Lippo are convinced that the settlers were not wholly responsible for the loss of the island's trees. Archaeological finds of nuts from the extinct Easter Island palms shows tiny grooves made by the teeth of Polynesian rats. The rats arrived along with the settlers, and in just a few years, Hunt and Lippo calculate, they would have overrun the island. They would have prevented the reseeding of the slow-growing palm trees and thereby doomed Rapa Nui's forest, even without the settlers' campaigns of deforestation. No doubt, the rats ate birds' egg too. Hunt and Lippo also see no evidence that Rapa Nui civilization collapsed when the palm forest did. They think its population grew rapidly and then remained more or less stable until the arrival of Europeans, who introduced deadly disease to which Icelanders had no immunity. Then in the 19th century, slave traders decimated the population, which shriveled to 111 people by 1877. Hunt and Lippo's vision, therefore, is one of an island populated by peaceful and ingenious Moai builders and careful stewards of the island, rather than by reckless destroyers ruining their own environment and society. Rather than a case of abject failure, Rapa Nui is an unlikely story of success, they claim. Whichever the case, there are surely some valuable lessons which the world at large can learn from the story of Rapa Nui. Part 3. Neuroaesthetics. An emerging discipline called neuroaesthetics is seeking into scientific objectivity to the study of art, and has already given us a better understanding of many masterpieces. The blurred imagery of impressionist paintings seems to stimulate the brain's amygdala. For instance, since the amygdala plays a crucial role in our feelings, that finding might explain why many people find these pieces so moving. Could the same approach also shed light on abstract 20th century pieces, from Mondrian geometrical blocks of colors to Pollock's seemingly haphazard arrangements of splash paints on canvas? Skeptics believe that people claim to like such works simply because they are famous. We certainly do have an inclination to follow the crowd when asked to make simple perceptual decisions such as matching a shape to its rotated image. For example, people often choose a definitely wrong answer if they see others doing the same. It is to imagine that this mentality would have even more impact on a fuzzy concept like art appreciation, where there's no right or wrong answer. Angelina Hawley Dolan of Boston College, Massachusetts, responded to this debate by asking volunteers to view pairs of paintings, either the creations of famous abstract artists or the doodles of infants, chimps, and elephants. Then they had to judge which they preferred. A third of the paintings were given no captions, while many were labeled incorrectly. Volunteers might think they were viewing a chimp's messy brush strokes when they were actually seeing an acclaimed masterpiece. In each set of trials, volunteers generally prefer the work of renowned artists, even when they believe it was by an animal or a child. It seems that the viewer can sense the artist's vision in paintings, even if they can't explain why. Robert Pepperell, an artist based at Cardiff University, creates ambiguous works that are neither entirely abstract nor clearly representational. In one study, Pepperell and his collaborators asked volunteers to decide how powerful they considered an artwork to be, and whether they saw anything familiar in the piece. The longer they took to answer these questions, the more likely they rated the piece under scrutiny, and the greater their neural net and the greater their neural activity. It would seem that the brain sees these images as puzzles, and the harder it is to decipher the meaning, the more rewarding is the moment of recognition. And what about artists as Mondrian, whose painting consists exclusively of horizontal and vertical lines encasing blocks of colors? Mondrian's works are deceptively simple, but eye-tracking studies confirm that they are meticulously composed, and simply rotating a piece radically changes the way we view it. With the originals, volunteers' eyes tended to stay longer on certain places of the image, but with the altered version, they would flit across a piece more rapidly. As a result, the volunteer considered the altered version less pleasurable than they later rated the work. In a similar study, Ocean Vartanian of Toronto University asked volunteers to compare original paintings with ones which he had altered by moving objects around within the frame. He found that almost everyone preferred the original, whether it was Van Gogh still life or an abstract by Miro. Vartanian also found that changing the composition of the paintings reduced activation in those brain areas linked with meaning and interpretation. In another experiment, Alex Forsyth of the University of Liverpool analyzed the visual intricacy of different pieces of art, and her results suggest that many artists use a key level of detail to please the brain. Too little and the work is boring, but too much results in a kind of perceptual overload, according to Forsyth. What's more, appealing pieces, both abstract and representational, show signs of fractals, repeated motifs recurring in different scales. Fractals are common throughout nature, for example in the shapes of mountain peaks or the branches of trees. It is possible that our visual system, which evolved in the great outdoors, find it easier to process such patterns. It is also intriguing that the brain appears to process movement when we see a handwritten letter, as if we were replaying the writer's moment of creation. This has led to some wonder whether Pollock's works feel so dynamic because the brain reconstructs the energetic actions the artist used as he painted. This may be down to our brain's mirror neurons, which are known to mimic others' action. The hypothesis will need to be thoroughly tested, however. It might even be the case that we could use neuroaesthetics studies to understand the longevity of some pieces of artwork, while the fashions of the time might shape what is currently popular. Works that are best adapted to our visual system may be the most likely to linger once the trends of previous generations have been forgotten. It's still early days for the field of neuroaesthetics, and these studies are probably only a taste of what is to come. It would, however, be foolish to reduce art appreciation to a set of scientific laws. We shouldn't underestimate the importance of the style of particular artists, their place in history, and the artistic environment of their time. Abstract art offers both a challenge and the freedom to play with different interpretations. In some way, it is not so different to science, where we are constantly looking for a system, and decoding meaning so that we can view and appreciate the world in a new way.